Well, hello there, my horde. It is I, Labby Dragon, here with a topic that I and only I care about. Whenever you have a really successful TV show, there's this coveted idea of franchising an empire by making spin-off shows so you can keep your cash cow going. There have certainly been popular spin-offs. As a child, I knew Frasier much better than I ever knew Cheers. Angel ran concurrently with Buffy for several seasons, though it was only able to stay on the air for one more season after its sire show ended. And I hear Game of Thrones has a prequel series that is maybe still happening, but I have no space in my heart for such matters, as nothing can take my mind off of the 1990s themed Schooled spin-off of ABC's 1980s themed family comedy, The Goldbergs. Unfortunately, I do have to lay down a little bit of a baseline about The Goldbergs to explain why Schooled pisses me off, because it isn't a good reason, but it is my reason, and I will lie in the bed that I make. The Goldbergs was a 10-season-long show that started in 2013, though I didn't really get into it until after meeting my husband in 2015, where it became like this shared comfort show for us, all the way until the series finale last year in 2023. The show was based on series creator Adam F. Goldberg's lived experiences growing up in the 80s, and was based on his actual family. Although his eldest brother became a sister, more for marketing and storytelling reasons than anything else. Without Erica Goldberg, the show would be missing out on opportunities to represent life for teenage girls in the 80s. With this reworking came Erica's best friend and the totally fictional Lainey. This is relevant as Lainey goes on to become the main character of Schooled through a very bumpy ride of creation for the show. The thing to note about The Goldbergs is that it takes place in a very intentionally anachronistic version of the 80s. The opening narration usually explicitly says something like, "It was June 1980 something." So even if you presume that the show starts in exactly 1980, you're going to encounter things that wouldn't actually happen or exist until later in the decade. However, the characters do age, and the last season of the show is Adam's gap year after failing to get into college, so the show does have an internally consistent timeline. Well, mostly consistent. By the third season of the show, Lainey ends up dating Barry, the middle child of the Goldberg household. They end up breaking up when Erica and Lainey go off to college, but by the end of season 5, both girls have dropped out of college, and Barry and Lainey get engaged. This engagement is broken off, and Lainey decides to move to California by the middle of season 6, just in time for the mid-season premiere of School. So, to jump over to the Schooled timeline, the original idea for Schooled was introduced as a backdoor pilot during The Goldbergs as an episode titled 1990-something. This version centered on beloved side character Mr. Glascott, played wonderfully by Tim Meadows, who was the guidance counselor at the school all the children in The Goldbergs attend. In the 90s, Glascott becomes the head of the school, and it included family drama in the form of his two nieces attending the school. Another major carryover character was the gym coach, Mellor, and the episode featured Beverly, the Goldberg matriarch, as an assurance to the audience that this had a right to be an episode of The Goldbergs. Personally, I think if they hadn't tried to backdoor pilot it, this version of the show had a lot of potential, especially in that it would not need to be very connected to The Goldbergs, which caused the very problem I swear this rant is getting to. But audiences were not very receptive to this episode. The honestly valid complaint being that it was not an episode of The Goldbergs, so a lot of people simply felt they had lost an episode of a show that they loved to something they hadn't yet been given the time to build positive feelings towards. So the network asked for a retooled pitch, and the version of Schooled that began airing in January of 2019 was born. The show now centered on Lainey coming back to her hometown in the 90s after failing to become a musician in California. She ends up taking a position as the music teacher at her alma mater, where Glascott is the principal, Coach Mellor is still around, and it introduces a young English teacher named CB, who started working at the school sometime after Lainey graduated. This new English teacher is based on one of Adam's real-life teachers, like so many characters before, but the basis in Adam's life is not a draw or much of a feature in this show, and honestly, by this time the original show had passed the days where episodes ended with real home videos of some of the scenes Adam had slipped into the show directly out of his childhood. Some of the spirit of the Goldbergs was there, though, now using this new setting of 1990-something to pull at my nostalgia, because I was not alive during the 80s, but I was a tiny child in the 90s. Unfortunately, I don't feel like the show ever reached the same height of nostalgic euphoria that the Goldbergs did, largely because it locked itself into following the adult ensemble, and there's just something about middle or high school characters that really make these modern period pieces work. It was the same difference to me that 70s show and that 80s show had, in my opinion. Like, there's just something about how high schoolers truly care about being of the now that allows a decade to shine as a set piece of a show. Schooled does have its appearances from the Goldbergs' main cast. Beverly arrives to do some signature meddling once or twice. Adam never shows up, but the character would have no reason to, and the actor still looked like a teen at the time, so they would have had to try to cast someone else as a slightly older Adam, and that just doesn't, that seems like too much work. Erica shows up maybe once, but it's pretty stark the fact that Lainey's very best friend is not a feature of the show. The girls have had to grow apart so that the timelines don't get too infected with each other, except that then they do. Barry and Lainey have still been broken up at the start of the show, but during the first season, Barry arrives to sweep her back off her feet, all while the show makes a big point of CB having a big crush on Lainey. Barry, having finished his medical degree, has to go do his residency in another state, but Lainey decides to maintain a long-distance relationship with him. So, the show really wants you to want CB and Lainey to get together. It's never very subtle that this is endgame, and in fact, the season 2 finale has Lainey and Barry breaking up off-screen, which is due to those good old 2020 shutdowns. So to be fair to the show, they actually had a whole episode written to address the breakup, and they just couldn't film it. While the Barry and Lainey relationship was always drama-filled, I found it really hard to have them start this show with them getting back together, which is what I wanted because I liked them as a couple on the previous show, but then they're waving their hand off to the side going, actually, you should like this guy over here because this is her love interest for this show. Like, don't dangle Barry in front of me if you don't want me to want them together. Just have him not show up. Barry is too busy doing doctor stuff to visit his ex-girlfriend, and maybe she still has some hang-ups, but she finally heals, and then the new love interest starts to pursue her. The thing where CB is pining for her while she has normal long-distance relationship problems with Barry just makes me hate the character. He looks like truly a wet paper towel to me. They do a few episodes where they try to fix this, but the damage is already done by the time they do that. So Schooled ends with Lainey and CB kissing, and that drama will never be truly resolved because for several reasons the show ended up being cancelled. It had a lot to do with the circumstances of 2020, but the show wasn't, to my knowledge, some ratings darling either. Truly a shame. Tim Meadows and AJ Malchica each deserve their very own show instead of having to share. Although they do work well together, don't get me wrong. I want my cake and also a second cake. I really love those actors and the performances they give as those characters. So just to see them as those archetypes in each having their own show would be marvelous. Thank you. Good night. Except not good night. I'm still here. Why does this make me seethe with rage? Well, we have to hop back over to the Goldbergs, which went on for 3 more seasons, but keep in mind, I consider everything in Schooled to be canon to the Goldbergs because they wrote Schooled in such a way that it didn't contradict the Goldbergs until the Goldbergs decided to fuck around with the timeline and find out. Okay, I didn't talk about Jeff before, but he's about to become important. Jeff began the show as one of Barry's friends, and though they remained friends, Jeff also becomes the long-term boyfriend of Erica. In the later seasons, when Erica, Barry, and Jeff are all going to college, and after Barry and Lainey break up, the show introduces Jeff's sister, Joanne. Joanne is of equal personality to Barry, loud, confident in themselves, but often lacking in self-awareness and knowledge. Barry is more on the empty-headed oaf side of that archetype, and Joanne is a little more sharp-witted and mean. These characters initially clash, likely because of how similar they are at their cores, and then slowly it dawns on you that the show is coupling them up. And you say to yourself, well, at least I say to myself, they can't want us to be invested in this relationship. We know he gets back together with Lainey in the 90s, so Barry and Joanne break up at some point. So I just never emotionally invested in the pairing. Imagine my fucking shock when the series finale of The Goldbergs features Barry and Joanne getting married. The credits roll, and I turn to my husband and say, they get divorced in like 4 years because he gets back with Lainey during his residency. Of course, my husband just shrugs at me, because why should we care? But I care. They can't just pretend like Schooled never happened. I won't let them pretend that Schooled never happened, because they literally went out of their way to get Barry and Lainey back together on that show, and how could they do this to me? Also, Barry just married his sister-in-law because Erica and Jeff got married already. They have a baby. Like, the Schwartz and Goldberg families are now in Ouroboros. Like, yes, it's not technically incest, but it's kind of fucking weird, okay? And that divorce is going to be messy because they're definitely still going to have to see each other at the holidays. Okay, so here we go on some wild timeline bullshit. Now remember that the 1980s of the Goldbergs is similar to ours, but not everything happens in the same order. However, the show did last for exactly 10 seasons, so presumably this is the full decade from 1980 to 1989. Except no, it's not, because each season of the show starts at the start of a school year, or like one episode of summer before the school year starts. So if you assume that the start of the show is the 1980-1981 school year, the show actually finishes in the year 1991. Do they still call it 1980 something? Yes. Are they wrong? Also yes, because they're the ones who clearly show passing time instead of making things a little more amorphous. However, I will agree that it's pretty reasonable to represent Adam the narrator not acknowledging the start of the 90s, because lots of us who build our personalities on the decade in which we came of age get actually really hazy on when that decade actually ended. Back to the timeline though. This means that when Barry starts undergrad in season 7, this is the 86-87 school year. Provided he doesn't take any breaks or fail any courses, he would finish his undergrad and enter med school in the year 1992. This will be 1 year after his marriage to Joanne. He would spend the next 4 years completing this program before entering his residency in 1996. So we can firmly say that school begins in the 96-97 school year of a version of the 1990s where things happen in a different order. Barry and Joanne have to have already divorced by this point, meaning that the longest their marriage could have lasted is 5 years. And that's why you don't start your sequel show before the original show is actually over. My husband can tell me over and over again that Schooled isn't canon, but he's wrong, and the showrunners are wrong, and I live in a world where Barry and Joanne got divorced, and Lainey moved back to town not too long after, and Barry mostly shows up to get back with Lainey because he sees this high school sweetheart coming back into his life as a sign, because at the end of the day, Barry is just this goofy little man floating through life. Schooled was a fairly mediocre show overall. It wasn't too offensive. The humor was definitely in the style of the Goldbergs, and the performances given, like, I'm telling you, like, Tim Meadows' Glasscott. I'm glad that they did more of him in the later seasons of the Goldbergs after Schooled ended, because it's just so good. So like I love a lot of individual things about Schooled, but unfortunately what Schooled didn't understand about the Goldbergs was that the family dynamic was the core of the show. You take this really heartfelt family comedy and you try to transfer the humor into a workplace comedy, and it just didn't seem like it meshed very well. Admittedly, Schooled was only 1.5 seasons long, so they might have eventually figured it out, but I don't think it found its emotional core. So now you truly know the depths of my warped brain. Hopefully you at least got to laugh at me for caring too much about trivial nonsense. And if you made it this far, you might consider subscribing to see what I get hung up on next. And with all of that, I will see you treasures next time.